In the 80s, that would have gotten you promoted. Nowadays, you're going to get canned.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Mathews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Words to live by, Ian, you son of a bitch. Words to live by.
Frankie, we're talking about the news today.
We've been on the phone for 2 hours talking about everything but the news. We've been talking about baseball cards. We've been talking about all kinds of other things.
If I'd have hit record on this Zoom call, we'd have had 3 episodes by now, but yet we're going to be scrambling to finish this episode because we're jackasses.
Correct.
So we...
That's news, Ian. That is news. We are jackasses. Big
Frank
news.
Frank and I are... we've been brainstorming different episodes that we could do. And one thing Frank and I typically do before we start recording is he and I will talk about all the stuff we've been reading in the paper or that we saw on TV or things that we're experiencing in our own businesses. And we share almost none of it. We share maybe 10% of it if it somehow applies to an episode because we get very specific on topics. And one thing that we've been chewing around on is, why don't we make an episode based on items of interest that we saw in the news or things that we're experiencing that are changes in the market that are impacting the different businesses that we're involved in. And so this new format, and for our regular listeners, we would love it if you sent us a text message, an email, a message on LinkedIn. Tell us if you like the format or what you'd like to see more or less of, if there is anyone actually listening to this episode. That's always the caveat we have to put here.
So there's a couple things. There's 2 things I want to say here. I always have things in 2s. I'm not very smart. I can't get the 3. It requires commas, and I'm not good at commas. So 2 things. Right now, I think we're in a very unique part of the news cycle. Right, there's a lot of things happening that are bad, and what I kind of come down to is this: there's kind of 3 camps. There's people who are 100% wrapped up in the news, and that's all they deal with is the news, right? Like my mom was in town and CNN was on, and like she watched the news. Like that's what she does. She's old, she's retired, basically watches the news. Then there's people who are incredibly informed that do follow the news, but actually produce a significant amount in society. And that's a rare number of people. And then there's most people who are kind of in Ian and mine's camp, where we are insanely selective on what we actually put in our heads through news. I listen to a handful of sources. It's really hard nowadays to not be biased and to not get sucked in, because when you go to your Google feed, like they're smart enough to like fill your head with stuff. So what we have done in our business,
and the problem with the Google feed, Frankie, and for everyone listening to this, is it really quickly realizes what you've hovered over, and it's
biased to you, and it tells you what you want to know.
It's all confirmation bias. It will put more stuff in front of you that does not ever change your mind, and
that's right.
That's not helpful if you're running a business or investing. You should be seeking out the
other
opposite,
opinions,
right? Things that force cognitive dissonance. You should be seeking that stuff.
So like the news cycle is such now, and your phone is such now, that you need peer groups. You need people to talk to, people who see things from a slightly different perspective than you. That's why masterminds, online or otherwise, are so important nowadays and are so popular, is because people are looking for another point. But with news, there's something else that I think is critical before we launch into this, and this is something we've talked about in our business now going back 2 quarters. What qualifies as news and what qualifies as noise? Most of it is noise. Most of America is emotional and is drawn into the noise. And what we want to be able to do as people that work at our company, and what Ian and I try and do, is look at the difference between the noise and what is actually news that affects us. And then how do you take action off of the news? Others are going to react to the noise. If you're controlling the narrative properly, you will allow the noise to affect others, and you capitalize based on news. And these are the things that you can make good decisions on. I do real estate. We make all kinds of decisions based upon news inside of real estate, while others are affected by the noise. Ian knows bonds and stocks way better than me, and he sees patterns. We were talking about baseball cards for an hour and a half this morning because we're seeing like how people are emotional. And so that is what we want to do in this segment is let's talk about things that are out there, and then how do you whittle it down and take action based upon what's happening? And not everyone's great at it, and Ian and I maybe aren't great at it, but we're pretty good at making sure it helps us in our life and the wind is at our back and it's not a headwind that we have to fight.
I love it. A story that I've been tracking, Frankie, is the big tech companies. And first and foremost, I'll say, I'll pat ourselves on the backs. In July, we did an episode that all but said the recession's already here, just no one's reporting on it. And I think by now, we're recording this in October. I think very few people would argue that we're in a recession, but I think we were pretty early on it 3 months ago. And one of the reasons that we were strongly in favor of us being in a recession were the reports of the big companies who were coming out and saying their operating expenses were out of control and they had missed earnings because of expense overruns. Since that's happened, some of the big tech companies, Meta, it is on September 30th, Meta came out and said, we're freezing all hiring. And advertising, Frank, forever, advertising is one of the first things that really get hit when a recession comes. Marketing dollars, advertising dollars. It's kind of foolish, but it's on, and what happens is the small companies just run out of money, so they can't advertise, and it's a death cycle they go into. So the smaller companies really start to go, and then the big companies that really weren't tracking how well those marketing dollars were spent, they start to hurt. So Meta, Google came out, and this was about 3 months ago. Google CEO Sundar Pichai, he came out and said, we're going to have a simplicity sprint. And what he meant by that is we got 174,000 employees. We're not going to cut people. We're not doing layoffs. Everyone wants to make sure we're not doing layoffs because they don't want to lose the good talent they have. So no one's going to use that word anytime soon. That will change. We'll get to that later. But he came out and said, look, I'm going to push everyone for your ideas. We're not looking to reduce workforce, but it's a challenging market. And I have real concerns as the CEO about our productivity. And truthfully, Google's productivity has always been shit. I've always joked that they're like the Dominique Wilkins of companies. All they do is score. They don't play any defense. And they've always scored enough where they won.
So stop there. Define that. Like so Ian and I've had this conversation going back a decade and a half, right? And Ian will often say that Google is the Dominique Wilkins of businesses, all offense, no defense.
So there's two ways to make a profit. You can make more sales, more revenue, or you can tighten up and spend less, right? So Google is notorious for beating on the top line, meaning we got more sales and revenue than everyone predicted we were going to do, and missing dramatically on the bottom line because they're a monopoly and they don't want to admit they're a monopoly. And so they spend money on all these stupid moonshots. Part of it is because they don't want to make so much profit margin that the government breaks them up, but they've always just been horrendously bad at running the actual operating expense part of the business. But now the CEO
before you get to now, let me weigh in for a second on this because I think this is critical. So Amazon is similar, right? Amazon went through a period early where they need to get the profitability, right? Google was profitable right off the bat because they had a better mousetrap than everybody else. Yep. And what they can, if you've never read an annual report of Google, it is fascinating because it literally tells you all the stuff we're talking about. And Ian, I don't read them every year, but I read probably 3 out of 4. I think Ian reads them yearly. They're an incredible way to kind of see what's happening in the economy because they touch everything. But what these companies do is like small companies don't have the ability to do this. Like, it in medical through R&D, but what people like Google do is they just, when Ian says moonshots, if you don't speak like this, what that means is they spend billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars on things that may or may not work. But if they do work, it turns into a lottery ticket. Like I think it's called Blue Horizons is the space arm of Jeff Bezos's his empire, and it started as a way not to pay the government taxes and to hide under the radar. So that's what these companies do is they have these incredibly audacious departments because they make so much freaking money. But for normal people and normal businesses, you don't have that ability. So you have to look at how much do I sell and how much do I spend? Where they don't, it's the opposite.
So you're right. So Google's their search engine is 70-80% of the market, and it has been forever, which is
For a long time.
one of the most profitable businesses in the history of mankind. To
And
the
if you're
point
scoring
where
at home, and if you're scoring at home, 70% is a monopoly.
it's a
That's all there is
monopoly.
to
It's
it.
it's an incredible monopoly. I don't know the last time you typed in Ask Jeeves to go do a search. You probably didn't. Everyone Googles everything.
Duck, duck, go, baby. Duck, duck, go.
So they have 174,000. Just to let you know just how much of these moonshots, they expect everyone spends 20% of their time on a pet project. They just 5 days a week, one of your days should be spent working on some project of something without revenue. And so interesting enough, the CEO is saying, I would like to improve our productivity by 20%, which my initial estimate was just quit letting everyone spend 20% of their time on stupid pet projects that'll never make any money. And he's going out and I think, so first off, I think it's commendable. I think that that's the job of a manager, is to go out and seek ideas from their people on how you can be more efficient, how you can be more productive. And he did get feedback from employees that had said, we're not a real efficient company. We don't make decisions quickly. So he's looking just for more efficiency. Well, anyway, they've been working on this for a couple of months now. And you can imagine you're Google, you're an employee of Google, you've been there 20 years. They pretty much spend however the hell they want, right? They got these lavish cafeterias. They're Hulu from, the Silicon Valley show that makes fun of big tech. That's who they are. They spend on huge trips. There's no expenses spared. And now you got a CEO coming in and saying, party's over. So now the CFO comes in behind it. He's like, hey, no discretionary travel. Hey, by the way, the Christmas parties this year, you have to submit a request for what you plan to spend. And by the way, you're getting capped. So all these little things are now perceived by 174,000 Googlers who are used to spending freely whenever they want, are being perceived as taken away from them. And there was the CEO had a town hall meeting, which are all digital, where he was in New York, and it got out that this thing got completely out of control. People saying, how come you're still making record amounts of money and yet you're nickel and diming us? You've got people complaining about, why is travel being cut? We just had record profits last year. And again, the key word being last year. I think a lot of people aren't embracing the fact that no one gives a damn what happened in 2021. If you can't realize this is a very different environment, which we're going to get into why, you're not reading enough of the newspaper. You're not paying enough attention to what's happening underneath the economy. But I can see where employees would be a little confused. You have job openings everywhere. You have people getting raises everywhere. People are dying to find employees out in the market. And yet there's this whole other side of the economy that is starting to crumble and break down. And smart guys like Sundar, Google CEO, he sees it. He knows there's a tough couple of years coming. So he's trying to get his company to embrace it. And he's saying, look, fun shouldn't always equate with money. Some of the funnest startups in the world to work in don't have a pot to piss in. They're bootstrapping everything. They're figuring it out in someone's garage. And I can't imagine the challenge it is trying to convince Googlers that are highly paid, that are now used to kind of milking this big fat cow, trying to convince them that austerity is the way going forward. And he's really struggling. These people really attacked him.
Let me weigh in. So here we go. Few things. First of all, Sundar's kind of a smart guy. Grossest understatement of the year. If you're CEO of Google, you are not just smart, you're fucking brilliant. You're like,
Yes.
You're generationally smart. That's one.
Yes.
So there was something that Ian talked about the people who are kind of freaking out and they're comparing everything to last year. This is why most people are unfit to lead. Most people lead with emotion and they don't lead with rationality or things that actually matter. Last year's over, it's in the book, it's history, it's getting written. What's important for leaders is to look forward, not backwards. Live your life through the windshield, not the rear view mirror. And that's what most employees are bad at. And that's why CEOs get paid a lot more, because they're great at having the discipline to look forward. I'm going to keep going. So I think this is a commentary on employment and how you start. And Ian and I talk about this a lot, right? We do interview type of podcasts. We do things on like the onboarding process. Ian teaches executives. He's got a course that he sells for a premium that's very good, but it talks about what the experience is like for an employee. What's the most important thing with the employee experience, Ian?
First 90 days.
It's the start.
First 90 days.
And how you start is critical. So these people at Google have been conditioned to think there's no bottom. So if there's no bottom, it's very hard to introduce a bottom later. So you're better to be harsh in parenting or in employment in the first 90 days and then loosen up than to be loose and try and tighten. There is a study, it's a famous study, it's about gorillas. I'm sure you've heard of it. There was gorillas broken into 2 test groups, and the gorillas were given, one test group of gorillas was given 1 banana, and those gorillas were happy as could be and insanely excited. And then there was a test group of gorillas that was given 2 bananas, but they took away one of the bananas from the gorilla, and the gorillas went ballistic, like just freaking ballistic, off the chain, but like crazy, because they were having something taken away from them. And at our core, we're the same way. So if something is conditioned and I think it's mine, if you take it away from me, I pout. And that's what's happening with these insanely smart Google people, because of Google has not had to have any rules, and now they're being brought back to earth because of the economy.
It's why, Frankie, it's why 90% of Americans are employees and not owners, because the human condition,
Correct.
we fear loss more than we get excited about the possibility of gain. So most
Correct.
people would rather be an employee because it's less risky going in. But so just to give you an idea, Google's revenue only rose by 13% in the second quarter, which is actually a really small number for them, Frankie. So revenue rose 13%, but their head count in the same quarter rose 21%, and their op expenses rose 24%. So double, their expenses rose by double what their revenue rose by. And these employees are still crushing the CEO of how could you ask us to reduce costs? And I think that's the takeaway for me. Companies are absolutely still hiring unless you got way too out ahead of it, which Google did. Clearly, Google, Amazon, some of the Meta, some of them got way out ahead of themselves in the way they hired because they thought it was going to be up 40, 50% forever. But most companies are still chasing. They weren't able to attract people the way Google did. And I think, Frank, part of the reason why Google felt like they were overstaffed or fully staffed is because they spend so much. They pay at the absolute top. They got the best benefits. They got the most lavish stuff. And now they're going to go through trouble because that's how they recruited people in. They didn't recruit people in by being anything other than who they are, which is a lavish spender. And so, but the average company, the average company is still looking to hire, and they've got a lot of turnover. Turnover's still atrocious in the market. And I think a lot of people are going through these period effects because it was in the paper today, Frank, in Wall Street Journal. Companies are still hiring, just as aggressively as they were, at the end of 2020 when people were rehiring everything. So you got these period effects where companies have been chasing staff for 5 years. And so this first level of the recession, you're not going to see major layoffs because people are still hiring just to replace turnover, because we talked about quiet quitting. We talked about disengaged employees. People are leaving at high rates. And so I think you won't hear about big layoffs until sometime in next year. First, people are going to just try to survive by not hiring.
No, I completely agree with you on that. And the fun thing about the news is you can kind of pull stuff up as we're talking. And there was a story this morning in the Journal, and what it talks about is exactly what Ian is talking about with the need to hire. Google is Dominique Wilkins because they're ahead. No shit, they're ahead on hiring. They got ahead of it. They have more money and they're smarter than everybody else. So they were ahead on hiring. They need to lay off first. This is like looking at macro trends. So this is my favorite thing about doing this segment. What are the takeaways? What can you learn from Google? And what I'm going to tell you is this: follow smart companies that are really, really, really well funded, and companies that are just brands that you must go to. Apple, Google, Berkshire Hathaways. These are companies that are smarter than all of us. And they are forced to share with us, read their annual reports. Ian and I read them every year. And what that shows you is how smart people think. It gives you a look into the brain of smart people. They tell us everything? Hell no. But they think smarter than us. And they're better educated than us, and they're more informed, right? They have lobbyists. We don't. So look at these things and then say, okay, Google is tightening their belt. I'm going to giggle and say they're dumb. They're not dumb. They're smarter than us. If they're tightening their belt, maybe that's a shot to me to say, I should start tightening my belt. I should start thinking about this. If it's affecting Google, how far down the chain am I?
Something else too, Frank. I love something you just said when you say they're more educated than us. Think about the unique advantage Google has. Google knows more about Americans. They know more about me and you. They know everything we've ever searched for. They know the words that are being searched for, a recession. I'm worried about my pay. They know so much about Americans and this economy. Why would they not be 6 months ahead of everyone? When you're Google, you know what all 330 million Americans are Googling on a daily basis. They have incredible data on the health of companies, the health of like the mindset of Americans going into it.
So I want to move to
it should make you pause when they freak out and start.
There's a book called Everybody Lies. Have you ever read it? Everybody Lies.
Yeah.
So it basically what it is it's a book written by people who have data like Google, and they talk about what people search for versus what people talk about. Google's smarter than all of us because they're the company that we go to search. So they know what we're worried about. They know what we're thinking. They know what we're feeling, and they're able to sift the data better than us. And that's why they're smarter than us.
That's why they can charge anything they want for advertising, because they know exactly who your customer is the second you type in a few keywords.
So this is the first time we've done this segment. I wanted a bell so we would shut Ian up faster. We ran long. Let's move to topic 2, and let's talk about why Google is needing to shrink.
Frank's excited to get to typical. Frank just wants to talk about the 70s all the time. So he thinks you're all going to be super excited about talking about Paul Volcker and the Fed strategy of the 70s. So I was talking long to try to avoid getting to this next segment, but Frank, go ahead and kick us off. That's my
you're in charge of the agenda to kick off. I'm color. Go.
So why is the stock market falling apart? Why is the economy falling apart? We have a Fed that is completely reversed case. So our Fed throughout the entire pandemic and a year after that was all about stimulus. So quantitative easing, keep rates as low as possible, pour stimulus in, give checks out to people, make lending as easy as possible. And they did it long after they should have. So the economy started to get healthy by the end of 2020, and yet they kept pouring money all over it. 2021, way too long, completely overheated every kind of asset you could think about. That's why crypto went crazy. That's why NFTs went crazy. Real estate went nuts. Commercial real estate. I can't think of an asset that wasn't going up. And then oil started to go up. And because you had all of this demand and not enough supply. And now all of a sudden, our Fed chairman, Powell, has completely reversed course. And this really started at the beginning of this year, around February, March, where we started really raising rates aggressively. But the last 2 raises have been 75 basis points. And
which is big historically.
And what Powell even admitted to at his last, when he gave his last speech, when he got interviewed after, he admitted to reading the autobiography of Paul Volcker. And he gushed about how much conviction that man had and how much courage he had. And if you do some studying on Paul Volcker, when he was Fed chairman, and it was kind of late 70s, early 80s, he was absolutely of the mindset that you had to crush inflation. And when he resided over it, mortgage rates, because he raised so hard, mortgage rates went as high as 18.6%. So I'm gonna let that sink in. People are freaking out because mortgage rates went from 3 to 7% today, which that's no small feat. And we'll get into that in a second. 2007 have not been that high since 2007. And so people are freaking out, but imagine mortgage rates of 18.6%. And while he was doing this, raising rates so aggressive, unemployment peaked at 11% in 1982. So 11%. Right now, what's unemployment? About 3.5, 3.7.
Under 4. It's like 3.7, 3.8.
Under 4. So the Fed, their mandate, they have two. They have a dual mandate. This everyone talks about. Full employment, which we absolutely have. We absolutely have. We're at 3.7% is full employment, and a 2% inflation target. We're not even close to that. We're closer to 8% on inflation right now. So what the Fed has said is, we're really happy with employment. In fact, we're probably more employed than we care about. So we're going to sacrifice that, and we are going to go break the back of inflation the way Paul Volcker did in the early 80s. And there's going to be a lot of parallels with that.
All right, I'm gonna stop for a second. I want to interject something quickly. Ian tells a better story than me, so he's right on everything he said. The two mandates are full employment and 2% inflation target. Those are the two major mandates. And for Ian, as long as I can remember, for very, very, very long time, 2% has been the norm with inflation, right? Like, we wanted GDP to grow at 3 to 4%. And we are hoping to keep inflation at 2%. And that way there's a delta where the country is getting richer over time. And if you look at it going all the way back to Reagan, which parallels with Volcker, the point of the matter is Americans are getting richer because the GDP is growing at a rate greater than inflation. So there's more money supply. And then
you're right. Inflation's not been an issue since the 80s. In pretty much our lifetime.
That's right. Since you and I were tuning into the news, this hasn't been a thing.
Inflation's not been in the news.
That's correct. But
maybe a few bits of like gas prices going up, a war here or something, but not like everything. That today it's real inflation. It's core. It's food. You're so right on that.
So so I'm a housing guy. I'm a real estate guy. This is what I do. I'm not great. When I have a stock question, I call Ian because he's better at it than me. He's better with bonds. He's better with mortgages. He understands it. But I do think this is critical, and I think this is something to talk through. Ian and I were talking a few months ago that his dad called and said gas prices are going up. And like, I pay attention, but it's not something I really worry about because of my company card. I'm usually on the phone. Like, I'm like, when it was over $100 to fill up my car, I was like, that seems like a lot. But I'm in a fortunate spot where I don't have to look at every nickel. Like, I don't know what every diaper costs. I don't know what every gallon of milk costs. I have a sense when the grocery bill goes up, like, man, it's really starting to tick up. But I'm in a fortunate spot where I don't look at every nickel. Like, it's a good spot. But the point with this is there's a squeeze. But I look at real estate. So interest rates on real estate, and this is fascinating. So when interest rates were at 3.5% for 30-year fixed mortgage, February, March, beginning of that time frame, like end of February, beginning of March, by April it was changing. But there was 350 basis points or a 3.5% market. Now, this is granular, but I want to go into it because I think it makes sense. I've never talked to Ian about this. The economists that I talk to say for every 50 basis points, the pricing must drop by 9%. So let's look at this. Now, I've heard 7, I've heard 9. I'm going to use 9. So at 4%, a $100,000 house is now a $91,000 house. At 4.5%, it goes down another 7%, down to $84,000. At 5%, it's down another 7%. So what happens very quickly is if you're a real estate person, you need to look and say, we're near the top because of affordability. Now, is this a universal panacea that fixes everything? Of course not. San Diego costs a ton more than Richmond. So you have to look at market by market specific, but you have to go back to affordability and interest rates. And what Volcker did, which Powell is following, Powell came out and said housing needs a bit of a reset. What that means is that there's been euphoria in the market, and we're going to get smashed on pricing, and you need to be prepared for this. Now, Ian, I think I've kind of gone.
And that's exactly what Greenspan didn't do. So right. Greenspan saw a bubble coming.
Yep.
Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but we all saw it. But he saw it enough and did nothing about it.
Correct.
But what he started.
And Bernanke was kind of like Greenspan. Bernanke kind of based everything he did on Greenspan, and that's why.
Yes.
The 90s and 2008 was a bloodbath.
And do you remember when Greenspan said irrational exuberance?
Yes.
In speech?
Yes.
He did almost nothing after that. So after that speech, he raised it by 25 basis points. And then he had a few other 25 basis point moves right away, but he knew it was a huge problem. What our guy now, Powell, is saying, I see a huge bubble. I see massive inflation. I'm raising 75 basis points 2 times in a row. So 150 basis points
It's not an insignificant number.
in 2 meetings like that
Yes.
fast. It went to close to 3% now. A lot of people are saying he's going to go to 5%. Greenspan did nothing of the kind, and that turned into a financial crisis. So I
Yes.
think another thing Powell's trying to do, Frankie, is keep this from becoming a banking financial crisis as it goes through. So I think that's important. The difference, I think that's why investors are freaking out right now, is this is a really hard 180 by the Fed, what they're doing right now.
So news doesn't matter. It's mostly noise. If you own nothing, if you live under a bridge, like none of this shit matters to you. But if you're participating in a capitalist society, this matters. So what do you do with it? If you're a real estate person, you should probably have cash and be prepared, because pricing is going to come down. If you're a speculator like I am, you need to be ahead of the curve, and you need to say, okay, where do things go? So we are selling a $1.2 million house, which is an expensive house for us. It's one of the top 10 most expensive houses that we've done. In Richmond, that's a lot of money. The median is 400, so it's 3 times median. And what's needs to be said here is pay attention to that. And this is what Ian and I want to drive out in this in this segment, right? For us, anything that we've sold over $900,000, we've done it, I think, 10 times. And 8 of them have been within the last 18 months. So you realize the market has shifted. So what you need to do is you need to adjust. We just talked about Google and how they're adjusting. I was walking through one of our more expensive houses yesterday. It sold, it closes today. And I bumped into the homeowners. And what they told me is, we bought this when rates pulled back. Rates had gone up over 6, and they dipped to below 4.5, like into the low 4s. And they gobbled the house up. They gobbled the house up because I put it on the market 4 days. As soon as that happened, I put the house on the market, and it wasn't finished. But my reasoning, and I talked to my realtor about this, I said, I think we should list this house now because there was a pullback in rates. If rates go up, it's going to be unaffordable. So there's a lot of moving pieces and levers that you need to pull, but you need to kind of be mindful of, people don't buy houses, they buy payments. So you need to be very mindful of what's happening in the market, and you need to give yourself the best opportunity to succeed. And that's where noise like interest rates turns into news that you need to take action on.
And I think a term that you're going to start hearing more in the news, whether you're
Stagflation.
paying attention enough, is stagflation, which is what happened under Volcker. So if we got a Fed chairman who now is idolizing what Paul Volcker did,
Yep.
during that crisis, it was stagflation, which just means you have like the worst of inflation shocks, which is what we're going through, and you have the worst of a financial crisis, meaning people are losing their jobs, unemployment's high. So stagflation is high unemployment plus high inflation. And if that happens, that's a very dangerous place to be in as a country. And I'll also say, I'm going to go right out there and say gas prices are a little lower. They came in from when you saw that $100 plus. But a lot of that is bogus, because what the government's been doing is drawing down on our strategic oil reserves. Right now, this is something not a lot of people are paying attention to, Frank. The U.S. strategic oil reserves, we've drawn down like half of it. It is now down as low as it's been since the early 80s, which is a very dangerous place. So just go ask Europe what it's like to not have oil reserves and have to rely on Russia right now. And the reason we're doing that is political, because we got an election coming up in November. So we're using all of those oil reserves to keep gas prices low. Just watch this winter, Frank. I'm here to say gas prices are going to spike big time, and not just because of we won't have any more oil reserves to spend on it after the election. You've got the Europe right now is going to go through this nasty winter where Russia's playing games with them and they don't have enough oil, and you're going to have a big shock, a big supply shock is going to happen, and it's going to impact the whole world. But there's no way it doesn't impact Americans. And when that happens, our inflation is going to take off again. And I think the stock market is reacting to all of that right now.
The stock market's smarter. The stock market reacted to COVID 3 or 4 weeks before it really hit us. And the stock market's smarter than us, just like Google is smarter than us. They know how to analyze data better, faster, and quicker than we do. And that's why they're in those jobs. So there's a couple of things that I want to add here. One of them is this. Yesterday, there was a Nord Stream pipeline damage reported. Did you see this?
Yep.
So NATO is blaming someone, and
Smells like Russia. Smells like Russia.
It smells, somebody did something, right? And what they're doing is they're damaging supply chain, and they're trying to put a squeeze. So
you see that it's like boiling the sea out there.
It's insane.
Did you see what's happening? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I saw the picture of it. It looks like a freaking whirlpool bath.
Yeah.
So but the point of this is these are the things that are starting to come and they're starting to happen. So I have been on a kick lately. I've been reading a lot about World War II. Ian and I have both gone through phases where we do this. I'm reading about Nazi Germany. I'm reading a ton about it. I'm on my 4th book, right? So the point of it is this: when people in the populace get desperate, bad things happen. What Powell is trying to do, like the rise of Nazi Germany happened because Germany lost World War I. There was a ton of sanctions and there was runaway inflation, and German people didn't think they could afford to live. And what happened is someone came and said, screw this. We are going to prioritize Germany, and we are going to say, screw it to the rest of the world, and we're going to worry about us. If you're worried about feeding your family, that sounds pretty good. Oh, I can get behind that, right? And that is what happened. And you can see the devastation that took place after. What the Fed is trying to do now, almost 100 years later, is they're trying to make sure it doesn't get to that point. They're trying to take steps, and they're trying to deliver to us some medicine. Buckler did it 40 years ago, and Reaganomics, and a boom economy came after it. And what we're trying to do, or our Fed is trying to do, is trying to prevent something as crazy as Nazi Germany. And they're trying to lead us to a point where we can have runaway growth, but it's very, very hard in the middle. And that's what we're living through right now.
If you wonder why Frank keeps blaming the classic Southern fiction writer William Faulkner on the 1980 stagflation, he just is mispronouncing Paul Volcker's name, but that's okay, Frank. Especially since you're studying all this German history, I would think you would have your German pronunciations down.
I said it right. I said Faulkner.
Faulkner.
How do you say it?
Volcker. Paul Volcker. It's not William Faulkner. The Sound and the Fury. Just one last thing on the stock market.
If you're coming for phonics, you're talking to the wrong Cava. Go to my wife. She's way smarter with pronunciation.
There have been 2 very big stock market downturns. There have been lots of little ones coming and going. But in the time since Frank and I graduated college, the 2 big ones were the tech bubble and the financial crisis of 2007. So it's just worth giving these stats. I think it's pretty fascinating. The tech bubble peak of the stock market was March of 2000. It took 30 months to get to the trough. The trough was September of 2002. And in that time, over 30 months from the peak to the trough, the stock market dropped 46%. And it took 7 years from that point to reach a new high, So that downturn was really ugly. And then the next really big one was the financial crisis, which had to do with the housing market, mortgages. The stock market peaked in May of 2007, and it troughed, it hit bottom 23 months later. And that time it dropped almost the exact same amount. So the first one was 46%. The second one, the financial crisis, dropped 48%. And that one got all the way back to a 1997 low. It wiped out a massive amount of gains. And it didn't hit a new high for 6 years after that trough. And so now we peaked in November of 2021. And so far we're down 25%. So for everyone saying, oh, we're close to a bottom, the last 2 really big stock market collapses were 46 and 48%. And they didn't hit a bottom for 23 and 30 months. And so far we're only about 10 months into this. So for everyone who's got this, hey, let's just get this stock market out of the way and historically, if this is a big one, which it kind of feels like a big one, we're about halfway through what they normally take to get through and about halfway down where a typical stock market. Does that mean it's going to go down 46 and 48%? Hell if I know. But I think history would say, Frank, we got months to go on the stock market dropping, and we've got a lot more value to drop.
Everybody in the real estate game is out there screaming and yelling, oh my God, it's a buyer's market, it's a buyer's market. Hell if it is. In 2008, Ian just talked about the real estate market dropping. Prices in real estate didn't drop until 2010, 11, and 12. 13 and 14 is when the market started to move up. That's a long time after 08. So it's early. Stock market adjusts faster because it's more liquid. People don't live there. So, people get stubborn and say, I'm not going to sell, but you lose your job, you have to sell. And that's what happens later in the cycle, but it takes more time.
I'm so glad you said that. So I think it's worth just staying that for another second. Real estate always lags the economy and it lags the stock market. So if the stock market sees that the bond market is the earliest. So we talked about rates. Bond market's the smartest money. Stock market second, that's also 6 to 9 months ahead. And that's not always great at predicting. But then real estate, normally if the stock market is really predicting a big recession, real estate comes along like 2 years later. So if you look at that, you're saying 2010, you saw big drops in real estate, 2009, even a little bit. That was 2-3 years after the peak of the stock market hit. So for us, when we look at what's going on in the bond market, stock market economy, real estate is just about to start cresting, and it probably already has. We probably kind of already reached a peak in pricing, but you're going to see 2023, 2024, a lot of those inflated gains are going to be given up, Frank.
So let's go through this quickly. Let's kind of, I want to unpack this my way. There's 3 markets we just talked about: bonds, stocks or equities, and real estate. Those are your 3 markets, right? Bonds are really only touched by institutions and incredibly smart people. Like, it's hard for us to go buy treasuries. Like, as a regular person, it's hard to buy a treasury. You need a broker to trade a treasury. So that is your smartest, most sophisticated money. Stands to reason it's first. It's ahead. It's the smartest. It's the least emotional. It's all about tactics, and it's about smarts, and it's about charts. There's no emotion. Stocks has a little bit more emotion because most people have an equities account. Like, your more sophisticated citizen has an ability to trade a stock. But a stock can be done while you're sitting on the toilet with your phone through an E-Trade account. So it's not quite as smart as bonds, but it's a lot more liquid than is a house, because you can literally just do this with it, right? And nobody lives in a stock. Like, someone came up to me and talked to me about the metaverse and how incredible the metaverse is going to be. I'm like, can you live in there? And they're like, well, yeah. I'm like, no. You need an Oculus, and you can't really physically live there, can you? They go, no. And I was like, okay, I'm going to own things that, shelter, which goes back 100,000 years. Like, we need that. So that's equities, that's stocks.
Yeah, the metaverse isn't helping people in Florida right now with Hurricane Ian coming rolling through.
Correct. And we're going to have to talk about that as well before we end. But the other thing that's really important here to talk about is real estate. You're like, again, this is not like a finger pointing exercise of smarts, but people buy houses before they buy stocks. It happens in almost every instance, right? Like, shelter is really important. And if you can buy a home, that's the American dream. Having a Scottrade account is not the American dream. Owning a house is. But that is, in a lot of instances, someone who owns one house does not think about a house or a piece of real estate the way Ian and I do that trade them. So we look at it with a more sophisticated view. Plus, your kids live in that house and go to school. So you don't want to disrupt them. So the reason that bonds move so fast, it's not personal and can do through professional outfits, and it's done quickly. Stocks work a lot the same way, but the public is in there, so it's not as smart as the bond money. And then housing is something that people literally celebrate Christmas in. So they look at it at a very different thing and not an asset. And it's the reason it moves slower. People often don't want to they don't want to admit, I made a mistake or I have to sell. So it goes slower. So if you are a real estate professional looking at bonds, looking at stocks, and then saying, will it absolutely happen? No. But does it typically follow? Yes. And these are the things that I think is so important about the news, is this is how you can filter it. And you can go back hundreds of years and see a similar pattern.
So Frank and I have a real estate project that's it consists of 3 assets, but one of them requires significant investment. So it's an old church, and we want to convert it into 15 condos. We have a dozen investors that we brought in on the deal, and 2 of our deals are doing so well that, you know, we're not rushing to do anything with the church. But the truth is, our costs to go to our construction costs almost doubled because of inflation. And I'm always looking at things, you know, some kind of trends. And one thing that caught my eye, Frank, was a report in the Wall Street Journal about lumber. So lumber is down right now. The cost per 1,000 board feet is $430, and that's down 70% from the peak just in March. So just last 6 months, massive drop in lumber. And I asked Frank,
Let me weigh
feeling
in for a second. So here's what happened. There was a price of lumber. The pandemic happens March, April 2020, and demand plummets. So the cost of lumber goes way down. But then somewhere around July, August of 2020, it went bananas. What are the macro trends? Macro trends are people are scared shitless. They want to hunker down at home. They want to have nicer places to live. So they start doing things like home improvement projects. So the mass of the market is the homeowners, not new construction. It's the people who are living in homes, and the market goes bananas. So pricing spikes, and there's this enormous spike. Go ahead, Ian.
Frank, it wasn't, no, so great point. So folks renovated instead of moving or building a new house because of the pandemic, and they were scared and they were bored. Everyone just sitting around their ass. So it's like, I'm going to buy some things. So
we've talked about this
contractors
before.
shifted to renovations. So the demand went up.
Yep. One second though. So there's roughly 2 million new construction starts annually. We've looked at this chart over time, right? Yep. It was as low as 1.5, it's as high as 2.5, but that's call it 2 million new construction starts. But there are 150 million rooftops in America. So the 150 million rooftops decided to renovate 10, 20% of those. So you start to see like, holy shit, it's a non-sophisticated person who's willing to overpay because now their wife and them and their kids are home, and I need to build a shed in the back so I don't get foreclosed on. So I'm going to run the Home Depot and I'm going to build a huge extension on my house. Yep. So that's what happened. And it's,
but that just explains the demand. But there were 2 things that crushed lumber too, Frankie. You also had all these lumber yards and lumber companies couldn't find people. Same thing. They didn't have staff. They couldn't go cut down the trees. They didn't have truck drivers that could get it. So you had the same supply chain disruptions you had everywhere else in the world. So right when the demand spiked, the lumber companies couldn't deliver. They couldn't deliver on the orders they were getting. So you had problems on both sides of supply and demand.
That's right. So we gotta hope, but there's 2 things that factor into price increases. There's material and there's labor. So Ian called me the other day and he said, hey, is this boding well for the church? And I said, maybe. And he's like, well, why not? So this is why not. Right now, construction is a very low margin business. What would you guess, Ian, commercial construction runs on as a profit margin? What percentage?
On a project?
Either on on a project, on as a business, as a project is fine. What would you say the commercial construction margin is on an average project?
So the commercial stuff I'm in on, you're happy to get a 6-7% cap rate.
But that's a cap rate. That's not the construction company. That's once the asset is stabilized.
So I would say it's still single digits.
It's low. It's like 2 to 4%.
Yeah.
Like my brother's.
I would never think it was double digit. Those guys are too competitive.
Right. So what does that mean? You build $100 million structure. It's a one-of-a-kind building because those things, you know, even the Wynn Hotel, which there's now several of them in the world, they're not the same footprint, right? And they're in different municipalities on different type of sand. So these are one-of-a-kind buildings, and they're running on like a 2% margin. So it like 3% is what the construction industry is. That's why I don't fucking build competitively. I want to own. Like owning things over time, inflating it 3% annually, and every once in a while we get a bonanza like we just had, and it goes boom like a hockey stick. That's why I'm on this side of the business, and I'm not cutthroat on construction. I'm not detail oriented enough to live in that lane. I live in this lane because I can be slightly smarter than most of the people in my market, and I can hold. And holding is the piece. So, but to the church specifically and what we're talking about, material price is part. The other part is labor. And labor right now is still in short supply.
Yep.
We talked about this with Google a minute ago, right? They're ahead. Construction is never ahead. Construction is always a laggard because it's tied to real estate. So right now it's still a frothy market. Let me just tell you some crazy shit that I saw in the last year. Construction people, like construction managers, it's a hard job. It's hard to find good people, but these people just get the snot beat out of them because it's such a small margin business. So people were showing up, interviewing with us, and they're like, I'm getting unlimited vacation. I'm getting this type of a salary. It was like the one period of time where construction was in such demand that people could demand incredible things. I called Ian and I said, look, what's out there right now isn't sustainable, and this is a bubble that will burst, but it hasn't popped completely yet. So plywood has come down, but what hasn't happened is the supply hasn't come down. And the reason for is very simple. Permits are already there, jobs are going, so it will continue. And this is another reason that real estate lags the market, because permits lag the market. So these things will work their way through, but on the back end of it, that's when the price degradation will happen.
So how much does a shortage in land play into real estate prices staying elevated? Because right now it's not sustainable for the average person at a 7% mortgage rate. It's not sustainable how much out of whack it's got.
So I think land shortages have a factor, but there's also an article that you and I texted back and forth just in the last couple of hours about rents finally coming down. Like, I think in macro, these things matter, but in the micro, what will happen in a recession is people are going to hunker down and stay where they're at. That's what happened in COVID, and it's what's going to happen here. So does it matter long-term? I think so. Does it matter right this minute? No. I think the broader economy and the fact that things are unaffordable because interest rates are going up, it's not going to matter with land. Land is a speculative play, and it's a very speculative play, and it's something to be very mindful of now. Like you and I were having a conversation a couple of days ago about someone we know who works in the land business, and they're going back and having to talk to developers and say, hey, I may have overpaid. If a house was worth a million and now it's worth 750, which interest rates are causing that land isn't worth what it was worth 180 days ago. So that's how these things all work in unison.
We're going to wrap this up with another piece of news that is probably less heavy than all this economic.
Despite the fact that you are now a destructive storm, we can hurt Ian with Hurricane Ian, and Ian is now not only a pain.
My name will forever be mud in Florida. If I ever decide to move there, people will hate me everywhere I go.
Correct. You're going to have to go by Barry. Destroyed
an entire state. Yeah, I'm going to have to go by my middle name for sure. So,
or IJ Senior.
So an executive at Apple found himself in hot water recently. So Tony Blevins, who's the vice president of procurement, he was summarily shit canned after doing a little amateur TikToking. So there's an influencer on TikTok who has a really big account. I never heard of him before, but I went and looked at it for this story. So he what is his name? Tony Daniel. So this guy, what his shtick is on TikTok is he goes around and he interviews people in really expensive cars. And so he'll go up to someone in a Lamborghini and say, what do you do for a living? And, gets a little hot take and puts it up on TikTok, because obviously you're rich. So he walks up on Tony Blevins, the vice president of procurement, and asks him what he does, because he was driving a McLaren, like a crazy expensive car. And here, let's go ahead and listen to what his response was.
Ooh. Good sir, your car's awesome. What do you do for a living?
I race cars, play golf, and fondle big-breasted women. But I take weekends and major holidays off.
Okay. That is quite the career. I'm looking to get into that.
Well, also, if you're interested, I got a hell of a dental plan.
Okay. You do it all. You do it all. Yeah. And you participate in this activity. Thank you so much.
Little known fact.
In the 80s, that would have gotten you promoted. Nowadays, you're going to get canned.
So, Frankie, little known fact.
In the movie.
What he said is blustery and gross as it is actually a quote from a Dudley Moore movie, Arthur, from the 80s. So his attempt at humor cost him a 7-figure job, which that just sucks. He probably just thought this was just some dumbass kid ask him a question. I'm making an offhanded joke and quote from an 80s movie. And it's been seen by like 6 million people on TikTok. So Apple found out about it. And I don't know, Frank, I don't think Apple had a choice, did they? I mean, once something like that is out by that much and you get that many angry people about what he said, I think in today's culture, I don't know that they had a choice in that situation.
I don't know. What I do know, and I don't know if I'm going to get too deep in this, 'cause I just won't, but not right this minute. Why the f did we lose our sense of humor? Like, what happened? Yeah. like, who did that hurt? I get it. The guy's got a distribution channel. He quoted something that's funny. Like, I guess it could be called offensive, but like
what sucks about this whole thing. So this is an older guy. This guy's in his 50s.
Which is not that much older than us, buddy. We're like smacking up against 50.
He didn't go post this video on his TikTok.
Right.
Kind of got like, it was like kind of gotcha journalism. Like a kid came over and the kid wasn't trying to hang him. He just said, "You drive an awesome car." And he ripped like a joke line from an 80s movie. And he did it in front of his girlfriend. So girlfriend's there and she's laughing. She thought it was funny. I don't know. I feel terrible for this guy. I guess the lesson learned for anyone listening here is when you have tens of millions of dollars of unvested Apple stock options, be wary of some kid walking up with an iPhone camera and asking you a question. It could be an influencer who gets you in front of 6 million people. That's just, to me, I just look at it as this a sign of kind of the world we live in and the times we live in. It blows for that guy, like an attempt to it's a boorish attempt at humor. But I'm a little with you on this of who did it hurt? Like, who did he really offend and hurt by quoting an 80s movie that is clearly a boorish quote from, an 80s movie? I don't know.
There's probably a deeper conversation here at some point. For now, I think it's time to rip it and call it a day. What I'll say to close is this. The news can be your friend. Do not get mired in the details of the noise. The news can dictate good and bad decisions, and it can help steer you through life, through business, through whatever you're doing, career choices, investment choices. If you pay attention to the news and you know how to distinguish the difference between news and noise. And what I think is noise is a headwind and news can be a tailwind. And we all want a tailwind to push us through. And if you pay attention to it properly and synthesize it properly, it can help you.
And I think what I'll say to wrap up is if you want to know the future, look at the past. That's why I think history is important. I think it's important to look back at different periods. I've always done that. And nothing we're going through is new. The news, if you look at it, will try to convince you that we're going through unprecedented times. Bullshit. We've had inflation before. We've had unemployment before. We've had recessions before. The stock market has dropped 30% in a year before. Nothing. We've had shortages of housing before.
Russia's invaded a country before. I mean, they did it with
just about
Afghanistan,
every 7 years of their history. Russia has invaded some country. There's nothing new going on. So if you go back and look at what happened when these things happened before and what happened the 5 years following, you normally have a pretty good idea. Normally things don't change too much. There are some unprecedented things happen, but everything we just talked about, there is a roadmap and we've seen what's happened after these things have happened. So behave accordingly and pay attention to history because it will inform you in the future. So thank you, for listening to our first shot at talking about the news. I think it was fascinating, Frank. I'm very excited. If you liked it, give us a 5-star review. If you didn't or you want us to change it, send us a text or an email and tell us what you think. Frankie, good hanging with you, dude.
Always a pleasure, Ian. The only thing that would have been more fascinating than this is if we could talk for another hour about baseball cards.
Hey, next episode, let's talk about baseball cards some more because that was pretty fascinating.
Correct.
See you, dude.
See you, buddy.